Usually I count us down to start, but we've actually been recording for about 30 seconds already, so I could look at the waves. So, hello, and welcome to the Snack Covenant episode 335. And Sin is not here, but instead I have a special guest.
Hello, my name is Mrs. Littletall, but normally I just call myself Little. And yeah, I run the Headcanon blog on Tumblr.
Yeah, you run a blog called, is it Headcanon the Shit out of Dark Souls? Is that the full title?
The full title is Headcanon the Shit out of Soulsborne, actually, but it started with Dark Souls.
And yeah, we've known each other for quite a while. This is just the first time we've recorded together.
Yeah.
What kind of inspired you to start a Headcanon blog?
What inspired me is when I played Dark Souls, I was really fascinated by the way the game is structured with the lore. You just had these item descriptions, and you had to figure out stuff yourself. And I got really fascinated with the character of Ornstein, and was like, wow, this character had so much pain in his life. And then I was like, who was this man? Who was he before he became a boss fight and we killed him in game? And that is what inspired me to think about this character more. Then I saw, on Tumblr especially, other people doing the same with Ornstein, and seeing all his different interpretations. And that made me think there are so many people that have headcanons for these characters, and I want to have a place where they can post all these headcanons, and that is why the Headcanon blog exists.
And before we proceed, we should probably just say that you accept everything that's given to you, pretty much.
Everything, but I won't take things that break canon.
Right, yeah.
If a headcanon breaks canon, then I can't take it because you cannot break canon. That is not what headcanons do.
Yes, that's just a little warning if people do go there, that there's some kind of extreme stuff, but it is behind a little link, so you won't see it unless you click it.
Yeah, I always put it under a cut, so it will be safe.
Yeah. So, I have my own interesting relationship with Headcanon, because I've actually been reading your blog for a while in preparation for this.
You probably saw some stuff there, yeah.
There's some real... Okay, I was actually, surprised by a lot of what I read there, because I hang around a lot of spaces where they will discuss, the lore and the world and the characters and everything, but I'd never hung around an explicitly, headcanon place before, and it actually was very different to what I was expecting in a lot of ways. Yeah, and the thing that struck me about the headcanons is that, it just actually read very similarly to the things that I see discussed on, the Reddits and Discords and things of people who don't view themselves as doing headcanon stuff.
I would say there are two types of headcanons, actually, and the first type is the one where you take something that isn't stated in canon at all, for example, the favorite food of a character. Let's say that Lawrence from Bloodborne really likes to eat pretzels. That is nowhere in canon. This is just something that I made up. But there's also the other point of headcanons, and that is that you look at the game and see what it gives you, and then you build up on it. What could happen, or who was this character? This is how I made my version of Ornstein, for example. We know he is a captain of the Knights of Grimms. We know he uses a spear. And we know he used to work with Smough together, and from this information, I built up the character.
So something that you talked about, the thing that interested you in Dark Souls to start with, was that the lore was sort of vague.
Yeah, it's vague.
I've been talking about this a lot lately, and I feel like the word that I'm using more and more to describe the storytelling in the Souls games is contextual rather than vague. So it's about getting little pieces of information that, on their own, if they were just in an Excel table or a wiki or something, if they were just there on their own, then they seem, vague and sort of free-floating. But it's about, where you are finding these and what is around them and what they are connected to, and the meaning is sort of proceeding from that. And I think that's a really interesting way to go about, doing storytelling.
I also think that.
Yeah, and I think that's what all these headcanons are making me think of, because they just feel like this is just the next logical step of something that's already been built up.
That is actually what I think when I think about the Soulsborne games. We are getting some canon in this contextual way and we piece it together. And this is something that I think. I don't think there is a clear lore. I mean, there probably is. Miyazaki has it. But everyone is encouraged to make their own version of the world.
Yeah. So an example of what I was talking about with, like, understanding the story as just a series of discrete pieces of free-floating information is the identity of the scholar in Dark Souls 3, the guy who's Lothric's tutor. Because an awful lot of people insist that the scholar is Aldia. And their rationale for that is that the word scholar is used and they're mentioned on a spell that is associated with Aldia in Dark Souls 2. And it's like, yeah, I completely understand that rationale, like, how that's working for you. But, like, if you approach it from, like, Aldia as a character, it makes absolutely zero sense, because Aldia as a character is someone who's defined by constantly questioning, like, what is going to happen next. And his philosophy is that, like, the sovereign of the world is the one who chooses the world that they rule. They have the power to create the world that they want. But because of that, every sovereign can create, like, a world that's different for them. Everyone's got the power to shape the world into something that they want, like, that they want personally. And it's not about, like, having a predefined, like, way that you run the world. But the scholar in Dark Souls 3, his whole thing, like, whoever the hell he is, he's the one who's telling Lothric, like, you have to do this. He's saying, you're going to not link the fire, you're going to have the dark take over, that's what you're going to do. And that's the total opposite of everything that Aldia stands for in Dark Souls 2. So it's like, there's these two completely contrasting ways of looking at that, where one of them is looking at, like, the word scholar and who had that spell in another game, and the other one is actually looking at Aldia as a character and Lothric as a character and how they interact. So as I look at this blog and I'm seeing things about, like, you know, like, this headcanon origin of, like, where Smo's armor came from, or, like, Maria confiding, like, suicidal thoughts in people and things like that, that strikes me as, like, it's coming from a place where they've actually really thought about and engaged with those characters in that world, rather than treating it as, like, just a database of things.
Yeah, I would say you could say it like this. I think especially Bloodborne is a very, very character-driven story. The whole story of Bloodborne happened only because Lawrence messed up.
Yep.
And we just see him as a boss fight, and we will only learn who the character is if we engage with him as a character. The same is true with German and Maria and Mikulesh and pretty much every important character. The same is also true for Dark Souls.
Yeah, because pretty much, like, the thing about Souls characters is, like, you tend to only really learn about them after they're dead. They're often not real, with the exception of people like Gwyn or something that's built up over the course of a game. Like, you often find out things after that character has gone.
A lot of them, I would say, we can use a trope name here, haunting the narrative.
Yeah.
It's when a character is gone, but the actions still form the world and the story. And this we see in these games a lot. For example, Elden Ring, Marika. She's not really there anymore. She's our ultimate goal, but she's haunting the narrative a lot.
Further developing on what we were just talking about, like, a lot of the Soul stories are actually kind of told backwards. Because what will happen is it will show you an effect, and it won't have any context to it. And then as you explore past that point, you will start to figure out where that came from. So it's, instead of showing you a cause and then an effect, it's showing you an effect and then later it's showing you a cause.
Yeah, I love this kind of storytelling, actually, because you are getting thrown in a world where everything already happened. And now you have to find out what actually happened. And they give you all these clues and tell you about all these characters, and then you can slowly figure out what happens. And I find it beautiful when everything falls into place and you are getting this, oh, that is what happened moment.
I think, like, as bizarre as it sounds, like, it's a more realistic way of having a story told to you, because, for example, like in Bloodborne, like, there's all of this awful, horrible shit in the past with Gurman, and he doesn't want to talk about it, so it actually doesn't make sense for you to, like, just get Gurman's backstory dumped on you. It's going to be something you gradually uncover, and he's probably not going to be involved in it because he doesn't want you to know about it.
Exactly. You are getting more information about Gurman if you talk to the doll, because Gurman doesn't want to talk about himself at all. They pretty much give you a puzzle to figure out, yeah. It's a puzzle you have to engage with, so if you don't read the item descriptions or don't look at the world or don't talk with the NPCs, the story will make no sense to you. So in a sense, it's a story you have to work for. They just don't give you it on a silver platter.
Yeah, I think, like, that's an important distinction to make, because one of the things about the storytelling is, like, I think a lot of people engage with it in a very binary way, where because you're not overtly, like, having this sort of exposition NPC show up and tell you this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened in this order, that therefore it's like, it doesn't make sense on some level, and it's full of all these, like, holes and dead ends, and really, like, the stories of those games are, I think, pretty simplistic, and they're pretty tight. It's just a case of, like, they're told in a way that is very contextual, but, like, the story is still there. It's not nothing.
Yeah, of course. The story is there, like I said.
Yeah.
The player is encouraged to work for it and find it out. I want to say something a little more about this, because I heard that Dark Souls is like this is because Miyazaki as a child was always reading books that were too hard for him, or they were for Wayne. And he had to make up a lot of stuff to make them make sense. And I think he wants the player to have this same experience.
Yeah, and, like, a lot of those books, he then, like, overtly draws from. Like, this is getting kind of off the topic of headcanon, but, like, one of the things about the Souls games is that, like, if you break them down, whole characters and set pieces and, like, incidents and things like that will be lifted from, like, movies and manga and those game books Miyazaki used to read and things like that. But it's the reason that they resonate and they work is, like, they're being used for a different purpose now.
I would say we humans all get inspired by other stories.
Absolutely.
And Miyazaki got inspired by the stories he liked, and he wanted to make something similar that is still his own. And I think the headcanons are kind of similar. We get inspired by Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Elden Ring. And we will see what can we do with his characters in their worlds that wasn't in canon. And that is where the headcanons come in.
Something else that I think is, like, a big reason why the Souls games kind of resonate with people and they get their claws into people and they get obsessed with them is that, like, Miyazaki is not really didactically trying to tell you something. A lot of it is actually Miyazaki just exploring a concept. I'm not even really saying Miyazaki because, like, Dark Souls 2 does this and Sekiro does this, and they're not, like, he's not really in charge of either of those, where it's about getting an idea and just exploring that idea and seeing where it takes you, but not necessarily coming down on, like, this is what I'm trying to say, this is what it's all about, this is, like, here's what the moral of the story is, or something like that. It just kind of sits there. So, like, something like the relationship between Maria and Gurman, or the relationship between, like, Quelag and her sister, or something like that, like, it's shown to you as this, like, awful tragedy that occurred, but you don't actually see, like, the guts of that story take place. You just hear about it. So it's left to sit there, like, what was that actually like? And Miyazaki is standing back and going, like, I don't really think I know what it was like. I just know that it happened.
Okay, so what was the relationship between Quelag and her sister, for example? In game, we are getting shown that he probably tried to ease her suffering, but what happened in between? Did they talk with each other and stuff? And how much turmoil did Quelag feeling about her sister? And we can also go with Gurman and Maria. What kind of relationship did they have? Did they have a father and daughter relationship, or were they in a romantic relationship? The game doesn't tell us that, but both of them can be correct if we want them to be.
Yeah, Quelag and his sister's a good example of, like, the contextual storytelling and kind of telling that story backwards, because the first thing you encounter is Quelag. You have no idea, like, what a Chaos Witch is, why she's there, what's going on. She's kind of built up to in that you see, like, partially insect/spider transformed hollows with fire coming out of them, and there's a bunch of, like, spider webs around, so you're sort of going, okay, there's maybe a spider thing coming up, and then this, like, Jorogumo thing shows up and fights you. And it's only after you beat her that you realize that there's someone she was protecting, because it's not stated beforehand. And knowing that it's her sister is something that you again only find out if you return with a specific item and get her to talk to you. So it's like, it doesn't start with the narrator saying, like, you know, and then Quelag and her sister fused with spider demons in order to better control the Chaos Flame, and then Quelag's sister was put in charge of, like, the eggs, and then Quelag is sent to guard her. You don't find out any of that. You actually just meet Quelag, and then you kill her without really knowing anything about her, and then after the fact you find out that, like, actually she was protecting someone. And that's...
If I think about Quelag, it's like the first boss that doesn't feel like the giant space flea from Norway anymore.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we have to face it, in Dark Souls the first few bosses are pretty much demons that don't really do anything for the lore outside of the demon lore itself. But Quelag is like the first really character from the lore, from the intro, and where you can find out what she actually did, and where you can start to feel really bad about her, like, oh god, what did I do, Way?
The thing that's interesting is, like, again, you can take it in different ways, because you can take it as like, oh god, what did I do? Like, she's protecting her sister, but at the same time, like, when you think about it, Quelag's thing is she is presumably killing people to feed her sister. Like, she's getting humanity to put...
That is also not okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, well, I don't know. And I think, like, that's one of the more interesting aspects of the story, that, like, it's not really necessarily that people are doing good or bad things. It's that they're just in situations where there's no way out that's not going to involve fighting. Like the Sif situation. Like, you don't just walk into a graveyard and murk Sif because you're awful. It's like, Sif has made a decision to protect the grave of Artorias, and you have made a decision to get the Covenant from the grave. And neither of you are going to deviate from that decision, so you fight.
It's pretty much conflicting decisions, yeah. Everyone involved thinks they are the ones who are right. Sif thinks they are right by protecting the grave, but the Chosen Undead thinks they are right by getting the Covenant to get the Lord Souls of the Four Kings. And that is why the fight happens.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's that. It's not that, like, we've taken the evil path, or that, like, Sif went bad and now we have to kill them. It's like, no, there's just two conflicting ideologies bashing into each other, and there's not going to be a resolution unless they fight.
Yeah, on the topic of Sif, we are getting actually an extra cutscene if we do the DLC before we do the fight, and that puts even more into perspective how much Sif doesn't want to fight us.
Yeah, and it's this real sense of, like, that's what gives the conflicts their weight, because it's not like we're just fighting, like, a very strong boss, which I think is how a lot of people initially interpreted Dark Souls, as just like a game with hard bosses in it. Like, in a situation like Sif or Quelag or something, it's like there is an actual conflict here, and it's spilled over, and it's kind of, like, gotten to the stage where it's irreconcilable, and it feels actually dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does feel dramatic. This is also where the headcanons come in, because you see all these fights, you see these conflicts, and then you think, who was this character? Why did they do this? Why did they decide to fight you? And what is their reason for everything? Could we have been friends in another life? And stuff like that.
Yeah, and we could have been friends. We are friends with Sif in another life.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So, you brought up Lawrence liking pretzels.
Yeah, I did.
You are a well-known Lawrence fan.
Yeah, I am.
Do you want to talk a little about, like, your Lawrence headcanon? Because Lawrence is a character that, like, Sin and I have talked about a lot, and, like, we've talked about Lawrence together a lot, and it's like, there's just these two, like, dueling Lawrences that have very different, like, approaches.
Yeah, it's complicated with him because I like Lawrence a lot as a character, but I'm also aware that he messed up and did a lot of shit. So in my interpretation, I pretty much have him as someone who doesn't want to listen to reason. He's completely convinced that he's right about everything. And even so, people try to tell him, hey, maybe we should do something else. He's like, no, we are doing everything right. We are doing it like I want. But I also put him as a character that is like I said, he likes pretzels, he likes cats, and he likes going on walks and stuff. He likes to go for a swim, and he's not just a black or white character, he's like a character.
So things like pretzels and cats and stuff, is that something that, like, you got out of, like, thinking about Lawrence as a character, or is it something that you sort of just thought would be, like, a cute thing?
I was like, it would be a cute thing.
So what, like, aspects of, like, the little version of Lawrence is, like, stuff you got out of the character? Because, like, Lawrence as a character has got 4 lines in the whole game. So, like...
Yeah, he got a few lines.
Because it's interesting that, like, yeah, he's got 4 lines, and, like, we've talked a lot about him, and Sin and I have recorded about him for hours, and, like, we've all kind of, like, converged on the same set of ideas, because despite having very little dialogue and, like, essentially 0 on-screen appearances, he's actually very consistently written, and you get to see, like that, you mentioned, like, the plot of Bloodborne is Lawrence messing up. And so much of Bloodborne is just, like, you walking through, like, it's like you're cleaning up Lawrence's messes after he's made them. So you do get a real sense of who he was as a character, even though you never really meet him.
This is the haunting the narrative that I mentioned earlier again. We see everything that the church did in the game. We are walking through Central Yarnums to the hunt, and we're seeing all those people turning into beasts. We are going in the Cathedral Ward, and the current vicar is turning into a beast in front of our eyes. We are going to Bergenworth, we find out that Lawrence left, and we are going through the story, and we are seeing all the stuff that Lawrence has done in an attempt to achieve another plane of existence, but instead he did something very wrong and turned the whole town into beasts, including himself.
Something interesting that, like, you said, and you're one of the few people who says this, and I think, like, you do have a really strong point here, and it's to do with the way things are presented to us in-game that we take the stance that we do, but, like, you're not that fond of Cainhurst.
Yeah, I'm not too fond of Cainhurst, because I have to admit this, it had to do a little bit with the fandom. A lot of people paint Cainhurst as a completely innocent. Like, the church did a genocide on it. That was totally not okay. I'm saying that. But they are talking as if Cainhurst was not doing anything. The game implies very heavily that the Cainhurst hunters came to Yarnam to hunt the hunters. It was a war. The church was just doing a war against Cainhurst.
Yeah, because Cainhurst is interesting in that, like, you only find it after it's collapsed. So you don't really get a sense of, like, when you're playing through the game, that Cainhurst was ever, like, a problem for anyone. But then when you read about it, it's like, well, hang on, this is the aristocracy. They had knights that, like, they were hunters, but they called them knights, that were putting down people in Cainhurst who were corrupted by the blood. The Cainhurst people themselves, like, they're clearly very militaristic, they're very proud, and, like, they are the aristocracy that are ruling over this village that doesn't look like a particularly great place to live. So we're feeling sorry for them primarily because we find them after everything's gone wrong and they've lost all that power. But at the actual apex of that power, they would have been the villains of the game.
Pretty much, yeah. And this is something that does upset me a little, that a lot of people who look at Cainhurst act as if they are not the villains. Of course, they are not the villains anymore in game, but in the past, they were the villains.
Yeah, it reminds me again of, like, Aldia, where, like, the Aldia that you meet is basically, like, someone who fucked up being the villain of Dark Souls 1.5.
Yeah.
In the sort of previous cycle where it's like Vendrick and Aldia and they're doing all these horrible experiments and everything, like, Aldia is the villain in that. And when you encounter him... Yeah, and when you encounter him in Dark Souls 2, that's like after his plan didn't work and he's had God knows how long, like 100 years or 1,000 years or something, to just sit there and like think over what went wrong.
Exactly.
And that's when he becomes this like much more reflective, sort of wise person.
Yeah, but we see Aldia's keep in game, and then we
Yeah.
see, wow, that is what Aldia did. Wow, this
Yeah.
was not okay.
No. It's like, again, like Lawrence, like we talked a very long time ago to Michaela about like Lawrence and Maria and everything, and like feeling sorry for characters, and it's like you can look at someone who's done horrible things, but then also understand like the shit that they're going through and feel a baseline of sympathy for that. So like, even though Lawrence did all those horrible things, when you finally encounter him, he's clearly suffering. And the music really drives it home with this like really sad like cello solo during the boss fight, where it's like, oh, this guy has just like destroyed himself completely. And in that moment,
I love the boss fight music.
yeah, and in that moment you can really feel like, despite everything, like he's really, really, really going through something horrible right now, and it's hard not to feel bad for him. Same's true of Maria, where it's like, again, encountering Maria, it's like Canehurst, you're encountering her after like she's completely broken and she appears to have committed suicide and she's tried to do all this stuff to atone and she's never done it. But then, like, the more you look into it, it's like, well, you were actually atoning for something that was genuinely horrible.
Exactly. This is another thing that I have to mention. Maria is often put a little bit too innocent for me from large parts of the fandom. Maria was active in the fishing hamlet, and this is what she tries to atone for.
Yeah, she's atoning for something terrible that she did, and it's like, she still did that.
This is something that I have. We can have headcanons, and I always say, every headcanon is fine, but sometimes you have a headcanon where you really squint and go, wow, did you even play the game?
Is there something, like, about headcanons that you want to sort of, like, just say as we start to wind this down?
I would say I encourage everyone to make up headcanons, regardless of what others say, even if I don't like them or others don't like them. We will always have conflicting headcanons, and that is completely normal. But it's really fun to engage with the games by looking at the characters and thinking about who they were, even if it's just little things like what was their favorite food or on which side did they sleep and stuff.
Yeah, so, I made a note of, like, some of the headcanons that I liked or just thought were funny on your blog. So I just want to, like, go over some of them, and then when I'm done, like, if you have any you remember that stuck with you, I'd love to hear those.
Okay.
Yep. So one thing I brought up earlier was, like, there's a headcanon there about Maria confiding her thoughts in other hunters. And I thought, like, that really resonated with me because you get the sense from the research hall that, like, Maria is, like, repressing everything that happened to her because she's around the patients all the time. And she sort of doesn't want them to know, like, what she did, but then you can kind of imagine, like, if another hunter showed up, like, probably not Gurman, because I don't know what was going on at this point with Gurman, but, like, someone else who actually understood what had happened at the hamlet, that she would drop the act and just be like, I can't live with myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's, like, totally, like, if that turned out to be, like, some cut dialogue, I would 100% believe it and not, oh, of course that would be in there.
I can totally see it.
Yeah.
Totally.
I like the idea that Vare is, like, basically, Vare is sort of, like, simping for Moog, and Moog just doesn't really care about him. Like, he's trying really hard to get Moog to like him, and Moog is just ignoring him in favor of Okina.
I actually love that headcanon a lot, because I think there's also, in game you have implications that it's a case. Because some lines of power, he really praises Moog, and once you did his invasion, he lies on the ground and prays to Moog to save him, and Moog doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And we kinda made it into, wow, he's totally in love with Moog.
Yeah.
And he wants Moog to notice him, but Moog is not noticing him because all he can see is Mikella.
Yeah, and that's, like, so in keeping with Vari as a character, that like when you first meet him, he's this like incredibly kind of assured, like smug, smooth talking guy, and he's trying to like tell you all about like the Mogwin, and like he's going to be the one that inducts you, and he's going to be the one that like shepherds you into it. And for that to then eventually just break down, it's like, no, actually, they don't care about this guy at all. It's like very, very good. Like, that's a really good story.
We laugh away a lot in the fandom.
Another one I really liked was that the pickled turtleneck recipe is like given to Radagon and Renala on their wedding night to help them consummate it.
Oh yeah, I remember this one, but I don't remember the wording, the exact wording.
It's interesting because the idea that the turtleneck is an aphrodisiac is like it's in an older version of the script that we don't have anymore. But like it's stuck with people because it's such a neat little detail that even though it's no longer in the game, people are like interested in it. And then you have like, oh yeah, and Radagon and Renala got married by a turtle. So it's like, of course they had turtleneck meat that night. Yeah.
Sometimes people are using cut content or older content that was patched out as space for the headcanons.
Yeah. There was one that was Jarban eventually finding Juno and Lanya's bodies along with... Yeah, so all of the Hoslo people end up together in the same jar, and it's like, oh,
this one was kind of hurting.
Yeah, like, that's a really, like... Again, I could absolutely believe that would be the end of that quest line if someone, like, dug it up one day. There was a really neat one about Malekith that said basically, like, that the Garank persona that Malekith had was something that he would dress as, and he would go around, like, preaching to people so they didn't know that he was Malekith. It was like a disguise. And it's like, oh yeah, that actually, like... That would explain why he takes on the Garank persona. Because
this makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, when you think about it, it's kind of a weird punishment to be like, your job is to be a clergyman. Like, this, when you think about it, like, why is it, he could just be anything and eat the death root. Like, he doesn't actually need to be going around preaching or anything. But positioning it as like, oh yeah, this is something he used to do. He used to actually be like a wandering preacher when he wasn't needed as the Black Blade.
This is what you get if you engage with the characters and think about them.
I tried to look for Sekiro ones, but like the blog is quite big, so I didn't find that many. But one I actually really liked was that Kuro is always trying to teach Wolf to play like little simple games with him, and Wolf gets confused by the rules.
Oh yeah, this was a funny one.
Yeah, but again, like that's entirely consistent with how Wolf is characterized.
Yeah, in game Wolf was characterized as he was trained as a shinobi, and this is pretty much all he ever knew, and Kuro tries to make him more human, but it's hard for Wolf to become more human because he's used to be a killing machine.
But there's that aspect to Wolf that's like little simple, like childish things that he was denied as a child, sort of like overstimulate him. So like he's like this very gruff, closed off like shinobi with all of this like psychological damage, but then he really, really likes sweet rice balls because when he was a kid he wasn't allowed to have them.
This makes him more human because he's having all this damage. But then Kubo is showing them kindness.
I really like Wolf because I remember when they first announced Sekiro and they had like, you're playing as a preset character and he's going to have dialogue and everything, I got a little hesitant because I thought, oh, he's going to be just like a really boring character and they're going to try justifying it by saying, oh, well, it's because he was raised to be the perfect killing machine so he doesn't have any emotions.
Oh no, this is totally wrong. He's such a good character.
Yeah, no, but they actually do that in a believable way. It's like, actually, if you did raise someone to be the perfect killing machine and you did cut off their emotions, they would kind of grow up like this, and it's about getting into that and realizing how fucked up he is, instead of using it as a crutch for bad writing.
Exactly, yeah. Sekiro is a lot more character and story driven and a little more direct, but there are still a lot that you have to find out yourself because they, like I said, they don't give it to you in a silver platter. They let you find out by Wolf's interactions with the people and his interactions with Kuro and the way he fights. And I guess Wolf is kind of figuring out himself as long as we play him. He's figuring out himself, and we as a player figure out himself as well.
Okay, so Little, do you have a personal favorite headcanon from your blog?
Yes, I have. It's a very simple one, but it's so wholesome that I will always remember it. Solea smells like the sun.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for guesting. It was great to finally talk to you. Oh, it was great to finally talk to you one-on-one. So do you just want to mention your blog again in case people are interested in finding it?
Yeah, the blog is on Tumblr. It's called Headcanon the Shit out of Soulsborne. And yeah, I am taking every headcanon that you want.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Littletall.
You're welcome.
And we will see you all next time. Bye!
Bye.
Thank you so much. Okay, so stop.